At a press conference following the EU summit on aid to Ukraine, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk claimed frozen Russian assets would be used for aid for Ukraine. I will not tell you anything more than what has been agreed, but I can repeat this one sentence again. Ukraine will receive 90 billion euro loans. This loan will not be a burden for Ukraine in the near future, because it will repay this loan from frozen Russian assets. However, what Tusk told his Polish language audience wasn't actually what was agreed on in Brussels. After a while, even Tusk himself said so. Those who feared the financial and legal consequences of the direct use of Russian assets today have achieved that these Russian assets are only a guarantee for the repayment of the Ukrainian loan, and not directly the cash or the place from where the money is drawn. The loan to Ukraine was to be financed from Russian assets frozen in the EU, but the member states did not agree to this. Instead, they agreed to another loan financed by the member states. This loan will be paid from a flexible reserve that was established and financed by all EU member states a long time ago. What happened with the loan to Ukraine is a failure of Donald Tusk's government. Money from frozen Russian reserves was supposed to be released, but instead, a loan has been taken out. According to Polish law, such a commitment should be approved by the parliament and the president, as it will also burden the Polish national budget in the future. Taking out loans is a completely new idea within the European Union, to use the provisions on enhanced cooperation between certain countries to incur additional debt. The Polish constitution requires parliamentary approval for incurring liabilities. According to the EU summit, the loan is to be paid back with Russian reparations for damages in Ukraine. The problem is that, as of today, reparations from Russia are a mirage. The Visegrad Group countries, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, all opted out of the loan agreement for Ukraine, with the sole exception of Poland. There is no doubt that if Ukraine does not repay this loan, the 24 member states will repay it from their own resources. According to preliminary estimates, Poland will have to pay around 5 billion euros, so it is difficult to call this a success. What's worse, Tusk's government's successes in international politics have recently been few and far between. This is despite Prime Minister Tusk's constant assurances about his country's strong position. Donald Tusk claimed no one would outwit him in the European Union, but here he is agreeing to everything, completely submissive to the decision-makers in Brussels. Should the EU's deal with Mercosur pass, in exchange for primarily German industrial products being exported to South America, Europe's markets would be flooded with cheap, low-grade agricultural produce from Mercosur countries. This could cause domestic European agriculture to collapse, since European farmers are bound by a heavier regulatory burden and thus could not compete. The vote scheduled for today during the meeting of European Union ambassadors on the safeguard clauses of the trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur countries has been postponed until January. Farmers' protests are sweeping across Europe. The largest demonstration on Thursday in Brussels attracted nearly 20,000 farmers from all over Europe to the European Parliament building. Ursula von der Leyen had to cancel her trip to Brazil, but she has no intention of giving up on this agreement, because for the German economy, this agreement is a matter of survival. At the same time, signing the agreement means the death of European agriculture and, consequently, Europe's food security. For 2 years now, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has claimed to oppose the European Union's agreement with South America's Mercosur countries that would be severely detrimental to Polish national interests.
Polska będzie przeciwna Mercosurowi.
Poland will be against it because we really want to take care of, or at least show that we will not give up when it comes to the interests of Polish agricultural producers. But now, when Brussels is taken over by protesting farmers from all over Europe, Prime Minister Tusk softened his tone somewhat and argued the agreement did not threaten Polish farmers. If the version of the Mercosur deal we have on the table now comes into force, it is already largely safe from the point of view of Polish farmers. The head of the European Commission cancelled her flight to Brazil, but another round of negotiations is planned for January, as Ursula von der Leyen plans to sign the agreement on January 12th. The Mercosur deal will return at the beginning of January. The next date for signing has been set for January 12th. There are 2 countries on which the ratification of the agreement currently depends. The fate of the Mercosur deal now depends on the vote of 2 countries in January, namely Poland, where Donald Tusk's position is shaky, and Italy, which is the weakest link. Meanwhile, the Polish government's actions are focused on negotiating security clauses rather than blocking the bill. Seeing the situation across Europe, And fearing this blocking minority will not ultimately be built, we are working on clauses.
To jest tylko I wyłącznie teatr polityczny, który ma...
This is nothing more than political theater to cover up the fact that Tusk's government sold their votes to Germany. They are in a coalition that will vote for Mercosur. They are in a coalition that has been pushing this agreement all along. And they are on a coalition that supports Ursula von der Leyen, who is the biggest supporter of this agreement. French farmers are still protesting. Italians are declaring protests, and Polish farmers are inviting people to a protest on December 30th.
Ponownie spotykamy się na drogach.
We are meeting again on the roads to oblige the Polish parliament to unequivocally and decisively oppose the trade agreement with Mercosur. This is the time for action. If you are a farmer and you oppose this destructive agreement, you should be at the protest on that day. It is difficult to say whether the protests will be enough to convince the Polish government to act in the interests of Polish food security rather than those of German industry. It is also difficult to predict to what extent farmers will be able to unite and convince other professional groups of their cause. After the United States announced a naval blockade of Venezuela, the regime in Caracas called for unity, and in many cities, the army began issuing weapons to members of paramilitary organizations. President Donald Trump has not ruled out open conflict and has announced further pressure on Nicolás Maduro. This is the MQ-9 Reaper, one of the deadliest drones in the world. It was used by the US Army in precision strike operations that killed, among others, Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's Al-Quds Force, Anwar al-Awlaki, leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's successor. For several days now, an armed Reaper has been spotted at a US military airport in Puerto Rico. Its presence in the Caribbean is a sign of constant control, pressure, and readiness on the part of the United States, without formal military escalation against Venezuela.
Our goal is regional stability and security in the national interest of the United States. The national interest of the United States, specifically when it comes to Venezuela, is as follows. We have a regime that's illegitimate, that cooperates with Iran, that cooperates with Hezbollah, that cooperates with narco-trafficking and narco-terrorist organizations.
This is reason enough for Washington to intervene. The two main justifications are drug smuggling into the US and circumvention of sanctions on oil exports.
Getting land, oil rights, whatever we had, they took it away because we had a president that maybe wasn't watching, but they're not going to do that. We want it back. They took our oil rights. We had a lot of oil there. As you know, they threw our companies out, and we want it back.
First, a naval blockade and the interception of tankers on the US blacklist. These vessels are said to belong to Nicolás Maduro's shadow fleet. What they did to a private ship carrying Venezuelan oil, already paid for and destined for international markets, is a serious crime under international law and binding treaties. Venezuela will continue its activities. Caracas is going for broke. There can be no concessions. For Maduro, the calculus is clear. Any show of weakness or uncertainty will result in him being deposed by his own associates. Hence, the desperate attempts to attract the attention of foreign allies. China consistently opposes illegal and unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law or authorization from the UN Security Council. China opposes any actions that violate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and infringe upon the sovereignty and security of other countries. China's problem is not with the detention of ships itself, but with who is doing it. China accepts such actions when they serve its own interests and has repeatedly used similar practices. For example, in the South China Sea. In this case, however, the game is about dominance over a strategic area, so Beijing will exert diplomatic pressure and may even stage provocation operations in the Taiwan area.